Welcome to Rates and Barrels. It's Tuesday, July 9th. That's right, it's Tuesday, so my neighbors can put their trash barrels away for one more day. I think everyone lost track of the days because of the 4th of July falling on a Thursday last week. It made me confused. Maybe I think my trash barrels had to go out, but Derek Harper, Eno Saris, Britt, all here with you today. On this episode, we are discussing the Cleveland Guardians. They are making us look foolish as we approach the All-Star break. We're going to take a closer look at why that has happened. Our AL Central predictions not looking great right now with the Guardians currently in control of that division. We're talking about Francisco Lindor, an all-star snub, and a player that people just don't seem to evaluate correctly. We'll try to dig into that. We'll talk about the Yankees' actual flaws and maybe justify some of the Yankee panic that's out there. And we'll look at some fits for Jazz Chisholm Jr. firing up the trade maker 3000 here on this Tuesday. So we begin today with the Cleveland Guardians. This is an amazing team, and it's amazing for a lot of different reasons. Most notably, they're just playing really well. They're 56-33. They played one less game than the Orioles, and they have one less win. And people don't quite put the Guardians on that level. I know I haven't put them on that level so far this season. We even tried to make an excuse for why their offense got a lot better, or at least explain it with, reasoning with changes around the park. And I think even that has been tempered a bit recently. Zach Meisel covers the Guardians for The Athletic, just wrote about it today because he had a mailbag question. And the question was, is there a wind vortex powering the Guardians to new hitting heights? And he broke it down by splits. The Guardians are hitting 245, 322, 425 at home, 248, 318, 402 on the road. So the slug does go down on the road, but he used SOPS plus, which measures performance relative to league performance for a particular split. Home away results, they have a 107 both home and away. So generally, the Guardians offense is about the same as it is on the road, as it has been at home. So, all right, who wants to apologize first out of the three of us? Because we all owe the Guardians an apology.
We do. And what's crazy, guys, is that if you told me that they were winning, I would have said, all right, well, they must be winning these games 1-0 and have this lights out rotation. And, that's what Cleveland does. That's historically what has made them successful as a team that kind of lives on the fringes, and people have tried to emulate and poach people from Cleveland because they've done so well with pitching. But that isn't the case in 2024. It's the opposite. And you've got guys like, Josh Naylor and Jose Ramirez, who I think people were worried that maybe he would start to decline. And then you have guys like Stephen Kwan, who I don't think anyone expected the kind of season that you're getting from Stephen Kwan. So it is the offense that is carrying Cleveland. And certainly their relief pitching Class A has been absolutely terrific. But I think that's the most surprising thing. And that's what I'm really interested, because I know, dug into the numbers here, is it sustainable for Cleveland? Because they're going to need to get rotation help. And to do that at the deadline, you're going to have to give up a lot. And they've historically been a team that hasn't made big blockbuster moves. They've kind of lived on the fringes. So, is this offense, is this performance sustainable in your mind?
I wanted to come on here and push back. I know I'm the king of waffles, so I wanted to be like, I have a hot take. I don't know if it's a hot take. I still think I believe this. I think they're going to lose the division. I think that the Twins are going to take it over. I am not here to apologize. I do not believe in most of this. And you said their starting pitching isn't good. Their starting pitching is last in the big leagues in wins above replacement. It's not good. It's not good at all. There's nothing good about it. I think they might have one good pitcher in the starting rotation is how I see it. Their bullpen is really good. That has floated them. That has helped them win the games that they can win. But then on offense, we get back to offense. And I looked at the fact that they just don't hit the ball hard. They're in the bottom third of the league when it comes to hard hit rate and barrel rate. So they are not hard hitters, and yet they're somehow, scoring in the top 10. And then I broke it down by individual players and just looked at who is outperforming their barrel rate. Barrel rate predicts slugging better than any other number. It's a quality of contact stat. And so, Stephen Kwan, number one guy here with a 529 slugging, and a small barrel rate. So, if you look at a lot of the guys on this list, you would say, this is a list of overperformance power wise. David Fry is also on here. Jurickson Profar is probably, everyone's sort of like, out of left field kind of guy, and he's on this list. You've got, Mason Wynn on this list. So it's not a list of power hitters, and Stephen Kwan is on the top of it. And so maybe, he does have some similarities to Mookie Betts. So maybe this is the beginning of Stephen Kwan's Mookie Bettsism. But Mookie Betts is such a singular character that I'm going to bet against that anybody else becoming Mookie Betts necessarily that quickly. So I generally think this is a team that's over its skis. But the one thing I would say is before, here comes the king of waffles. Before I wanted to come in here and be like super negative about them, I did do one last check. And they are third in the big leagues in pulling their fly balls. And Isaac Paredes was on that list. And Isaac Paredes is the king of pulling fly balls. If you pull all of your contact, if you pull your fly balls, you can make the most out of you can hit the ball, 101. If you pull it in the air, it's a homer. So they have sort of taken a little bit of a page out of the Rays playbook when it comes to offense, and it seems to be treating them well. So that's my caveat. But overall, I see the Twins pulling together. There's also, I could be a little bit more positive about the Twins, about the positive things I see on the Twins. But I generally think the Twins are a better team. Also, like, just sort of like do a blink appraisal. Just be like, okay, what do I think? Twins starting rotation, Guardians starting rotation.
Well, yeah, sure, agreed.
Sure, that's an area where the Twins would be favored.
Guardians lineup,
much closer.
Agreed.
Much
Twins
closer, and a key difference though, the Twins have had a remarkably difficult time keeping their key position players healthy. Whether it's their fault, randomness, I think it's more random. But Royce Lewis not being on the field, Byron Buxton often being hurt, like Carlos Correa, even before he was a Twin, often being banged up. They have a lot of guys that have increased injury risk, which I think gives them more volatility in their lineup. One thing I like about the Guardians, though, I'm glad you brought up the Isaac Paredes thing. So when I saw his name on the list, we were getting ready for the show, I thought, okay, this is the hack. This is the thing that people have probably learned from us about hitting the last couple of years. Pulling the ball in the air is really good, and it helps you get away with not having the dark red StatCast power indicators that we're looking for. Because when you kind
of need the dark red StatCast to have opposite field power. That's what sort of how the relationship goes.
Right.
Like Stanton can hit it out oppo.
Right, because he just has absurd power. And if you don't have it or you don't develop it really well, then this is the approach your hitters have to be able to execute in order to get to power. I mean, this is a team that last season, they were last in Major League Baseball. The Guardians hit 124 homers. The Nats were second worst. They hit 27 more homers than this Guardians team. And the Guardians already hit 103 home runs this season. So they're only 21 behind last year's total. They're tied for 10th in homers right now. It's a 108 WRC plus this year. It was a 92 a year ago. So they've flipped things in a way that I think is somewhat sustainable, and they've kept that strikeout rate down. So they're pulling their fly balls.
They were 29th in pulled fly balls last year.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know how you change it
wild.
that much that quickly. I think there's more to dig into here. They have 5 regulars with a WRC plus above 100. And they may have a little bit more coming because they have some younger players or recently debuted players that could get better over time. Daniel Schneeman's pretty interesting. John Kenzie Noel's pretty interesting. Angel Martinez is up right now. Or you could get something out of Bo Naylor. Brian Rocchio maybe could get a little better. Kyle Manzardo could get a little better in another attempt at the big leagues. So like they have a few guys internally that could improve. And I think this will be a little bit different for them this year. So the other thing Zach wrote about recently is that because the Guardians won the draft lottery, they have the number 1 pick this summer. And that's pretty interesting as a non-bad team, actual good team to have that pick. That gives them more in their system to potentially trade, or at least more confidence in trading away some major league ready talent because Charlie
Knowing
Condon
they're going to get Condon or Bazana.
Probably going to, one of those two guys is going to be in their system, and he's immediately going to be a top 25, top 30 overall prospect. So you can trade someone because you're going to get someone right back in this draft here. So I think that's pretty interesting. Other couple things that stood out to me about this team. They lead the league in strikes fouled off. I've never looked at the stat in my life, so I don't even know if it's a thing.
Where did you even get that? What even prompted you to look that up?
I went so far down the rabbit hole in Baseball Reference that the dirt was like it was untouched. It was unbelievable. I was that far down the rabbit hole. I don't know if that's a thing. I think it's a sign of being pesky if you're fouling pitches off instead of swinging missing.
Good contact ability overall.
Yeah.
Right. So you pair that with some of the things they started to do. It's different. They're top 5 in 2-0 count seen. So maybe that means something. I don't know. I just think there's a lot of ways for them to go out and actually address some of their needs. Now, the pitching questions, we're going to get to those in just a second. Those are real. The other thing that teams that exceed our expectations on an annual basis often do is they play good defense. The Guardians play good defense. They're second. They're second in defensive runs saved.
Yeah.
They're 13th, and now it's above average, so a little bit of difference there. But they're at least an average defensive team and probably an above average or well above average defensive team, which helps make your pitching play up. Now, can you get away with the league's worst rotation with a league's second best bullpen? I don't think that's a recipe for success all the way through October, but it can definitely work for a half season and leave the door open for your team to go out and add a starting pitcher or possibly 2 at this trade deadline, because that depth in that bullpen is really good, right? Behind Clase, Cade Smith, Hunter Gaddis, Nick Sandlin, Scott Barlow, Sam Hentges, Tim Herron, not household names, but if you can roll 6 or 7 guys out there that have a 15% K minus BB that are just nasty, that's really nice. That takes a lot of pressure off those back end starters.
Yeah. Yeah. If they get 2 pitchers, and I'm glad you mentioned defense because I was going to and forgot, but I think they've had plus 50 defensive runs saved. I mean, that goes a long way in helping teams that shouldn't win certain games win those games. If you have a good bullpen, you have good defense, you can at times work around a less than stellar starting rotation. That being said, they have to get at least 1 starter, if not 2, if they're really going to go for it this year, right? Which I don't know if it's going to be a market that they can get 2 impact starting pitchers without totally sacrificing their future. And that's not something we've seen Cleveland do historically, because they play in that cycle of, we're going to always be competitive. We're going to avoid the fire sale, tear it down, the prolonged rebuild. But that comes at a cost. So, you look and it's early, and I know we'll get to Jazz Chisholm later. There'll be plenty of time to talk about who they may trade for, but I don't know if it is possible for them to upgrade that rotation solely at the trade deadline. And I don't think they really have these, correct me if I'm wrong, but they don't have these arms that are going to come up and all of a sudden save this rotation. So that remains, like, I'm not going to go all the way with Eno and say that, we're not wrong at all about them, because we were wrong. I mean, we're sitting here in July. It's not May, it's not June. It is July 9th as we tape this episode. And Cleveland is, as DVR said, basically the Baltimore Orioles in terms of record. So we were wrong in a lot of facets. A lot of people were wrong about how Jose Ramirez would perform now that he's north of 30. A lot of people, I feel like, have kind of been sleeping on Josh Naylor, who probably should have been an all-star last year. And this is the first year that he's going to be an all-star. So, there are things we were wrong about, but there are still some real big concerns, which I think is what Eno is trying to get at, that, like, unless you get 2 legitimate starting pitchers, you just can't compete with the rest of the rotations in this league. And we're not mentioning Kansas City, who is like a stone's throw away from competing in this division as well, and who is a little bit of a pesky team. So it's going to be a harder path than I think Cleveland has had in previous years in the AL Central if they're going to stay on top.
One other thought on the pitching, though. Tanner Bybee has been even better than expected. He's actually pitched kind of like an ace. They needed that in a big way. Gavin Williams just got back from an elbow injury that really kind of first started in March. Got hurt lifting weights, had a setback, just finally rejoined the rotation. He's really important for them now. And then Ben Lively, another pitcher who has gone to the KBO, come back and actually had some success. He's been fantastic. I don't know how you project Ben Lively for the second half, but a 3.14 ERA and a 1.16 whip. I mean, he's basically done ratio-wise what we would have thought a healthy Tristan McKenzie could have done. And McKenzie has struggled. Logan Allen has struggled. They've both been sent to AAA. Carlos Carrasco's been in the back of this rotation. All three of those guys have run ERAs over 5, and it hasn't really mattered. The Guardians score runs in buckets when Logan Allen pitches for some reason. That's just sort of random, but it's a good day to score a lot of runs because Logan Allen has been giving up a lot of runs.
Yeah, I don't know. I know that Lively has an interesting fastball that's hard to pick up, but that might just be something that works for, half a season and then everyone gets a second look at him. We've got him projected using Stuff Plus at a 4.7 ERA. Carrasco 4.3, based primarily not on his stuff, which has really declined, but his track record. And Bybee, I like Bybee, but Williams, Gavin Williams, there are some ramifications from the injury, I believe. I don't think he's all the way back. But we have him projected for 4.1 ERA. So, you could make the case of like, hey, Bybee, Williams as the 2, and then we just win games more on offense with the other 3. I could see it some, but I think if there's any team that needs like a Yusei Kikuchi, I think this could be that team. And I know he may not sound like an impact arm, but he would be immediately the second or third arm in this rotation. And he's a rental, so he might not cost as much as other arms, and that might fit the way that the Guardians want to work. It would be weird for them to buy a starting pitcher, but I think in this case it's warranted. I mean, you don't really have like to Britt's point, you don't really have arms that are coming up unless Joey Cantillo gets healthy. And you don't have, you have Matt Boyd, who's hurt. Joey Cantillo was reinstated and is pitching in AAA. So there's a lot of questions about Cantillo's command, by the way. We're talking, 12 to 20% walk rates in the minors. So he's not a can't miss starting pitching prospect. In fact, if they traded him for a Kikuchi, it might make sense.
Yeah, I do think Kikuchi is underrated right now. I think he's been one of the latest control improvement reclamation projects in Toronto. Robbie Ray was sort of the first, and Kikuchi is now the second. He can miss bats. I think he would be like a number 3. He'd be someone they would use in the postseason. I think part of my shift with the Guardians believing they're going to hang around is looking at what they've done at times in the past. There is room for them to add payroll. There always is because they're frugal. But when they've been good in the past, they have nudged into that like 110, 115, 120 range, and they're under $100 million for payroll right now. So if they're willing to take on some payroll, Kikuchi getting there would be one chunk for the rest of the season, but maybe Zach Eflin, who could be available from the Rays if they can get healthy.
Max Scherzer's contract's a little bit big. Can they handle all that?
That's too rich for their blood.
Aren't the Mets already paying? It's like a good portion of that, though.
Oh, yeah. That's true. That's true.
So,
but like he has to prove that he's healthy and productive again. I think Scherzer could get moved.
Yeah,
but
Chris Young did just come out and say, we're going to trade it. We're going to trade all these guys if you guys don't turn it around. So.
I'm sweating about the AL Central. I still have the Twins over the Guardians in the end. They have 8 head-to-head matchups against the Twins still, 7 against the Royals. Are you both staying with your Royals call from this spring? The division?
I'm staying with my Royals.
No, I'm hopping.
The division is still not is by no means decided. If you look at the division right now, I think the Royals are another team that's like Seth Lugo, maybe one of the coolest all-star stories. One of the better starting pitchers in the American League, if not in all of baseball. I think the Royals are going to go as far as Bobby Witt Jr. can carry them, who's been such a dynamic, exciting player to watch. It wouldn't surprise me if they go on a run. I think they're going to be another team that's going to look to upgrade. That's what's going to be so interesting is like if multiple teams in the AL Central go into this trade deadline looking to make significant upgrades, right? Like the trade deadline is going to be, and we've seen this, and we've talked on this show, they should push it back because there are so many kind of fringy teams that are going to want to upgrade, like the Mets. The players have been talking to Stearns about upgrading according to our Will Salmon. So If the Royals approach this deadline as we're still in it, and they very much are still in it, they're 49-43. It's going to get crazy. No, I can't get back down on it's only July. I can't say I was wrong. I mean, I was definitely wrong about Cleveland. We all were. All three of us were. But I am not going to say my prediction on July 9th is no longer valid because I've seen crazy stuff. I've seen the Braves erase double digits. So
that's a good point.
Not doing it.
If you're offering me door number 2, I'm hopping. I'm hopping.
Wow.
The Royals.
I'm hopping off the Royals and onto the Twins. Yeah.
Wow. Look at him. In a few weeks, he's going to be on Cleveland. I can't take it.
But, I mean, so part of my reasoning is just that. By the way, there is a really fascinating thing called the Monty Hall problem, which it makes no sense, but I assure you it's true. Which is that if you are given a choice between 3 doors, Monty Hall used to have a game where behind one of these doors is a free car, and you had to choose between one of the doors. And then once you chose a door without opening the door, he would give you the choice of choosing the other 2 doors, one of the other 2 doors. And here is where my mind breaks, and I don't understand anything. And it's been explained to me a million times in a million different ways. And I still don't understand it. Mathematically, it's been proven. I don't even know how that's possible, but it's been proven that you switch.
Yep.
It's been proven that you switch. I don't understand that because it still seems like a 1 in 3 shot. But in any case, the math says you switch. So if you're I chose door number 1, which is the Royals, and you're giving me the chance now, and I even have some information about what's behind the doors, then I'm definitely switching doors.
The Twins are only 3 up in the win column. It's not like this huge.
I know, but here's my reasoning is just that I thought that the Royals would be fueled by a real surging young core of bats. And that hasn't quite happened for me. Just in terms of they have a 95 WRC plus as a group. You see Melendez struggling. Michael Garcia has not quite gotten where I want him to be. Vinny Pasquantino and Bobby Witt are looking pretty good, but it's not. If I had been right and all those guys were hitting, I'd be more likely to take them. Instead, I see a Twins team that I think looks pretty strong in every facet of the game. And I do, yes, the injury thing is a huge asterisk, but that's to me basically the only asterisk because in Pablo Lopez, Joe Ryan, and Bailey Ober, I see a really strong front 3 for the rotation and enough depth with Festa and Varland and Woods Richardson to withstand some injury. I think this bullpen is underrated. I love Duran and Jax. I like Alcala. He throws 100 with a sinker. Tealbar has a great big old sweeper. Stomont threw 101 this week. They have a guy named Funderbunk. That's enough for me. Funderbunk for president. And then the offense can be a little swing or miss, but I was surprised to see this. I ranked the baseball by strikeout rate, and they are 21st, meaning they're in the top 10 in strikeout rate. And so that's been a critique I've had of this offense in the past, and that's not really there. So my recipe for the Twins' success is really simple: is Royce Lewis comes back, Brooks Lee stays on the team, Byron Buxton stays healthy. I know, but that's my recipe.
I agree. If all that happens, sure.
What do they need to trade for? I don't even know what to trade for them.
That's the difference. I think when you look at the Twins compared to the Royals and the Guardians, even though the Guardians have that lead, you have to have more trust that the Guardians front office and ownership especially will actually let them go get the upgrades they need to get, or that they're going to fix one or both of Tristan McKenzie and Logan Allen at AAA. Because as constructed, I think that's where things will break down on the Guardians. I think it's the starting pitching. And that was the concern we had earlier in the spring when we talked about the division. They just didn't have that next group of pitchers ready to go. And that's something we'd really grown accustomed to about this organization in recent years. So Britt's staying with the Royals. Eno's jumped ship to the Twins. He's joining me where I am. And I'm just apologizing for not respecting what the Guardians have done year over year over year. They're doing it a different way. I didn't see that coming. So I'll apologize for that, but I'm not jumping ship on the Twins either because
you can see how we would have thought ahead of the season, though, like, oh, the Guardians, the king of pitching, and then look at their pitching and be like, I don't see the pitching that's normally there for Cleveland, so I'm not going to take them,
Yeah.
Exactly. Their hitting was nobody saw David Fry and Stephen Kwan coming.
Yeah. So. Not like
one of
this.
5 All-Stars. David Fry is an All-Star. Great story. I mean, just one of the reasons why that lineup has exceeded expectations. David Fry. It's nice to see him get some recognition and get a trip to the All-Star game next week as well. All right, so let's talk about Francisco Lindor. A lot of stuff here if you're a Cleveland fan. I mean, we didn't all join the Guardians bandwagon, but I think we tried to make it right as best we could. I want to know why people can't evaluate Francisco Lindor correctly. So since he was traded from the Guardians to the Mets in 2021, he is 8th. Francisco Lindor is 8th among all position players in F4. Okay, so almost a 20-win player since the start of 2021. That's really good. And yet again, Francisco Lindor is not an all-star. He hasn't been on an all-star team since 2019. I don't know why. There are not 7 shortstops that are all better than him in WAR since 2021. It hasn't been one of those situations. And even our own Jason Stark wrote a great piece looking at current players and their chances of reaching the Hall of Fame. And my brain kind of puts Lindor in the same tier as Manny Machado and Nolan Arenado in terms of trajectory right now, likelihood of reaching Cooperstown someday. I think Jason had Lindor maybe 1 or 2 tiers below. So I think that's a common thing. I think there's a lot of people that look at Lindor and see something a little bit different than what I see. So I'd like to know whether we're talking about Mets fans or any group of baseball analysts, why do people seem to miss on getting it right with Francisco Lindor and how valuable he is? Because he has been, by career F4, in the same tier as Manny Machado and Nolan Arenado up to this point. My mental math was right. Like I had them grouped correctly based on staring at the Fangraphs pages for the last decade. Amazing what kind of skills you can develop if you just stare at the same thing over and over for a decade. Why are people getting this wrong with Lindor?
Well, this is why I said to you guys yesterday, can we please talk about Lindor getting snubbed? Because I don't think it gets the attention it should. He does start really slow. Historically, his Aprils are brutal, and that was no exception this year. I mean, he was brutal well past April, and the Mets had a really bad April. So I don't think that helped either, because whenever the Mets are struggling and Lindor is also struggling, he becomes the center focus. And, I know this because I do TV stuff for the Met station SNY, and it feels like every single show, the first 6 to 8 weeks, is about when's Lindor going to get on track, right? So it becomes this huge thing, and people don't realize the value he brings when he's not hitting, or, even when he is hitting, people almost don't appreciate that unless he's on some otherworldly tear. You look at Trey Turner, who got voted in, and I wonder, is this a case of fan bases? Because Trey Turner missed considerable time with injury. If Lindor had missed considerable time with injury, we wouldn't even be talking about him, right? And it was a little complicated this year. Ellie De La Cruz gets in, and then, DC needs a representative. CJ Abrams ends up being voted, and, he very much deserved it as well. But you look at it, and all of a sudden it's like, okay, do we somehow overshadow Lindor, even though he plays in this big market in New York? Because he's not a flashy guy. He's a guy who's quiet. He's under the radar. He starts off really terribly. So even though his numbers are always there, we somehow look at him and say, meh, he didn't have a good season, because we remember that bad start so much more than if he had a really bad July, right? I mean, David Fry cooled off considerably this past month. People don't remember that as much as they do April, and I don't know why that is, but it feels like Lindor is a guy, and to a lesser extent, you can make the case that Brandon Nimmo could have been an all-star as well. But every year it feels like Lindor is kind of that guy who gets overlooked. And I don't know if you gave him truth serum, if it really bothers him all that much. And I think that's part of it too. He's not this flashy guy. He's not Ellie De La Cruz, where people would riot if he wasn't at this game. And I think he's just a very consistent, dependable superstar. And I think if you look at the top 10 players in WAR over the last 5 or 6 years, he's the only one who's not an all-star in there. So it is a very weird, all-star Francisco Lindor, all-star, like we are just forgetting about how good this guy is. This guy plays at a very elite level, very consistently. And for whatever reason, he gets to sit home every year at the All-Star game.
Yeah, I think, there's a couple things going on. One, I think, is it's a little bit more defense than offense, maybe. A friend of the show, Mike Petriello, over at MLB, tweeted that he thought that Lindor was on track to be a Hall of Famer. And he was surprised by how much pushback he got and how much sort of hatred he got for that. But if you just look at just the Machado Arenado comparison, he's gotten 5 more wins than either of the two of those on defense alone. And so it's been more of if you just look at offensive value, he's third among those three. And he's first in defense. So I think that a slightly more defensive first package sometimes doesn't attract people. I think that the first half splits, you're right. He has a 125 WRC plus the second half, 113 in the first half. That's for a career. That's pretty amazing. You don't normally, it's not a predictive thing for most people, but I do think some people just, start slow. And, I do know that around the league, people swing less in April. And so maybe that just doesn't fit his game right. Maybe as he starts to become more aggressive and sees the zone, then he always heats up. But maybe he should think about being more aggressive in April or something, switch it up. But in any case, if you have a slow starter, you have a team leader, like you said, on a team that wasn't doing well. So the question, there were so many questions in April that were like, what's wrong with the Mets and what's wrong with Lindor? And then people start remembering all the stuff about, Tommy Pham criticized their work ethic on the Mets and said they were the least hardworking group of position players he'd ever seen. And but Lindor's okay. But Lindor said something like, Tommy Pham really showed me what working hard meant. And so there was you throw all these things together and you're just like, is he does he not work hard? Is there something there? But I think what it really is also just the timing of the vote, and then the fact that the vote for reserves is player-based. So if you're a player and you're not playing the Mets a lot and you're not seeing Lindor straight up, and yet you have a vote, you're on the Anaheim Angels. All you see are the things on MLB on MLB Network that are like, what's wrong with the Mets? Why is Lindor struggling? And that's what you remember. I doubt many of the players were pulling up Baseball Reference or pulling up Fangraphs and really, taking out pencil and paper and figuring out who they were going to vote for. It was more like, man, I saw CJ Abrams hit that tank on MLB Network. He gets my vote,
Yeah, it is pretty interesting because if you look at the breakdown of the rosters on MLB.com, they have little characters to indicate which players were chosen by the league and then which players were voted in by other players. If you go through and kind of click through, you're like, okay, 5 pitchers in each team. That's how it works. A couple infielders in each team. The player selections for NL infielders, Luis Arias, Mookie Betts. Okay, I get that. Ellie De La Cruz, yeah, I get that. Freddie Freeman, yep, I get that. And then Ryan McMahon got in too. So I think it would come down to, do you think Luis Arias deserves it versus Francisco Lindor? For me, it's Lindor. Lindor is a good defender. Luis Arias is not. Luis Arias is a fun player in the sense he doesn't strike out. He gets the ball over the field. But who would I rather see in the All-Star game? I'd actually rather see Francisco Lindor. Yeah, I just think he's a better fit. And you can just move someone over to second base. It's an all-star game. It doesn't matter, right? You don't have to have a, air quotes, second baseman or someone who's played second base.
Luis Arias is fundamentally bad at many parts of baseball. I don't know if you've ever seen him play defense, but he's not good at defense.
No, it's not good.
Have you? I don't know if you've ever seen him run the bases, but he's not good at running the bases. He's really good at one thing. Lindor, that's another thing, right? Lindor is really good at all things, but
he's got power. He doesn't strike out.
He's not the best at anyone.
He plays great defense.
He's not the best at contact rate. He doesn't light up Statcast. He doesn't have the best barrel rate. He's not going to steal 100 this year. He's just going to steal another 25 to 30. It's a kind of a well-rounded defense, with a lot of defense. I don't know. I think it's hard to appraise. Just comparing to Luis Arias as a player, which one would you rather have? I mean, to me, it's pretty obvious.
It's a no-brainer. Lindor, 10 out of 10 times, like not even close. So I don't know. My recurring complaint, if there is one about the All-Star Game rosters, would just be that because of the way voting works for the starters and because of the narrow time frame people are looking at with it just being this season, we end up with some good stories, but not necessarily the best showcase of the talent in the game right now. And I think if you consciously said, we're taking a look at the last year, since the last time we played an All-Star Game through now, who are the best players in the game? I think you'd remove some of those outliers, some of those, oh yeah, that guy was an All-Star once. Like you'd lose a few of those, which, maybe takes away a few fun stories, but probably keeps someone like Lindor from being snubbed year after year after year, despite being a top 10 player since being added to the Mets in that trade.
You have.
Yeah, like I don't get too into the All-Stars, but like the Phillies have 7 and the Orioles have 3. Like there's just a lot of discrepancy. 7?
Yeah. I mean, sometimes it becomes a question of like who's drawing better, because you kind of vote at the park a lot. But I'm just pulling up last year's All-Stars, and you can kind of just looking through it, you can kind of pick out, oh, who had the great first half and then faded. Like you're like, oh, he was an All-Star. Yandy Diaz was the All-Star starter for first base. Remember, he like hit homers for the first half, and then he kind of became who he always was afterwards. Whit Merrifield was on that team. I don't even remember him being that
last
good.
year.
Yeah.
How was Whit Merrifield an All-Star a year ago? What happened?
I think
you barely remember who was on that team too, right? You more so remember the home run derbies, or I do anyway, than the All-Star game participants.
Austin Hayes was on that team.
Yep.
That's a little surprising. Michael Lorenzen was on that team. I don't know. Orlando Arcia, was the starting shortstop.
Oh yeah.
And these are good stories. So I don't want to take away from them. They had good. They deserved it in the way that it's done. But it is kind of funny because then, when we have the Hall of Fame discussion, just to go forward, on the Lindor thing, when we have the Hall of Fame discussion on Lindor, somebody will bring up the All-Star stuff. And I'm just going to be like, I don't care. I don't care. I don't care. If I'm voting for the Hall of Fame, I don't really care about All-Star selections. Because Joey Votto, it does not make Joey Votto worse that he didn't make a lot of All-Star games. It just meant that he kind of had an OBP type thing, and he was a first baseman when like Paul Goldschmidt was a first baseman, and there were other first basemen. I don't think that it makes him a lesser player that he wasn't voted All-Star more often.
Yeah, I mean, I think Votto was breaking into the league probably around the time that Albert Pujols was still
that was
dominant
Pujols first,
every year starter, and then like Paul Goldschmidt was there, so then it was always up to the player vote and the extra fan votes and all those extra, all those little things you do to get those last spots, and those don't always go to guys that play on small market teams. They don't always go to the best players. Like it's silly, and I know it's going to come up when the Lindor Hall of Fame debate happens someday, assuming he stays on the current trajectory. It will come up. Why didn't you play on more All-Star teams? Like, I don't know. I literally don't know. He should have been on all of them. Yeah.
And I think there's a real batting average bias, among the fan voting. I want to look for Whit Merrifield's first half batting average last year.
Now who's down the rabbit hole?
He hit 290. So,
it's no Stephen Kwan, but
it's not a Luis Arias situation, but it did mask the fact that he wasn't really doing that much else.
I think there's a lot of people that sit there in the stands and they see Whit Merrifield and go, I could have been Whit Merrifield if I was a big leaguer. It's like, no, not even that. He's a good player, but I don't know what he was doing in the All-Star game last year. I don't know. Can't explain that either.
You guys are hating on Whit Merrifield.
It's because I'm always wrong about him. But like by the time I finally came around to recognizing what he was doing, that's when the decline hit. So I was wrong like 4 years in a row when he was good, and then I flipped, and then he was kind of just a barely above replacement level player, and there I was holding the bag.
You're like me with a little bit with Chris Sale. I was like, yeah, he's gonna get injured. He's gonna get injured, right? He's gonna get injured, right? No, he's not gonna get injured. Oh, damn it, he got injured.
Happens to everybody. Let's move on to this other team that no one ever talks about. Let's talk about the Yankees for a minute. And I'm going to put the question this way. What are the Yankees' actual flaws? Like, don't tell me the sky is falling. Just tell me what the problems are with the Yankees. They've had a rough stretch recently, and that's to put it mildly. They're 12-18 in their last 30 games. They're 5-15 in their last 20. So everybody is panicking in the Bronx. And it's, yes, a top-heavy lineup around Aaron Judge and Juan Soto, who are 2 of the 3 or 4 or 5 best hitters in the game over the last 5 years. They're just amazing. Defensively, they're not a bad team. 7th in defensive runs saved, tied for 6th in outs above average. But the pitching's been a liability recently. So, what's the issue? What does Brian Cashman have to do to fix this, to keep pace with the other top-end teams in the AL, and to make this team more dangerous come October?
I think you got to take a good hard look at that rotation after Cole and say, do you believe the early performance of Stroman and Rodon, or do you believe what you've seen over the last few weeks? Because let's take Heel out of this, because he was never really even supposed to make the rotation. Made it because of Cole. Innings are going to be a factor, and the Yankees kind of see him as being a guy they're just going to put in the bullpen later this season. So his slide, a little more acceptable. But to me, you got to look at these other guys, Nestor Cortez, and you have to wonder, like, do you believe that Carlos Rodon and Marcus Stroman are going to be able to turn it around? Because if you don't, then you better go out and get some starting pitching, because that has kind of been their demise when you look at the way starting pitching is gone. Cole hasn't pitched well either, but you're obviously not, you have faith in Garrett Cole, a guy who's won multiple Cy Youngs, that he's going to get back on track. Stroman has been a hot and cold guy over his career. He's had halves to seasons that look vastly different. So I think if you're the Yankees, you look and you say, what do we believe here? And do we need starting pitching help? Because, the Orioles are also going to have to upgrade. They have a big hole in terms of starting pitching, and they've had a hole. You can make the case they need more than one starting pitcher. But, it's going to be a very crowded market. So the best thing the Yankees can do is improve what they have. But if they don't believe in those guys, then they better get in the mix for some of these arms that are going to be available in the next 3 weeks.
Yeah. It's kind of hard to put the finger on one thing, because there's just a couple of holes in the dike, I feel, that may have outsized importance. And then, you have the Yankees who are in the crucible of like attention. And I don't know if I wish you could see what it's like to work a Yankees game. It is just, even when they're on the road, there's like 35 media members in there at all times. And so I think that there's a real sort of fascination with like picking apart the smallest little things on this team. But I would look at the rotation. And one thing that pops out to me is Neil Payne, who used to work at 538. He has a Substack. He had a piece today about how the Yankees are the kings of inconsistency. And he looked at the standard deviation and sort of the ups and downs of their monthly win percentage since 2022. And they are number 1 in inconsistencies in 2022. In fact, if you remember the 2022 season, there was a lot like this, where they look at the best team in baseball, and then they were the worst team in baseball for a while. Or at least that's how we read it. And I think there's, to some extent, because of all this media attention, we take something and blow it up. But the fact that they're number 1 in inconsistency, number 2 is the Red Sox, and they have pitching issues. This is where I'm going. But also then Marlins and Angels and Mariners. So it's not like a list of great teams. And then the teams that are like have the smallest deviation, the teams that are the most consistent, the D-backs, the Astros, the Guardians, the Dodgers. So it is interesting that the Yankees are different than some of these other teams that have had sustained success. If you do just a leaderboard of wins over the last few years, you'll get a lot of these same teams on there, except the Yankees are super hot and cold, and some of the other teams are more consistent. The way that I'm putting this together is the Red Sox are inconsistent, and the Red Sox have pitching issues. The Red Sox have a hard park to pitch in, and the Yankees have a hard park to pitch in. And I think what happens is that when something's just a little bit off, when you're doing something just not optimally, when your hamstring hurts, or your back hurts, or you did this little thing wrong, or maybe you're not doing the mix completely right, you get punished in Yankee Stadium. That's how I feel. You get punished in Yankee Stadium. You get punished in Fenway. You have to be at your best. And so when I see Stroman as like a 5.5 ERA at home, I say Stroman is a guy that I signed to get me to the postseason. He's not a guy that I signed to start games 1, 2, or 3 in the postseason. So I don't think he's the problem. But the problem is that when you have, guys who are like that, and then they're not doing their best, they might give up 6 or 7, in Yankee Stadium. And so I think you kind of have to build a murderer's row of a rotation in Yankee Stadium to win it all. I think you have to think you have 2 or 3 aces. So I do think Rodon has to get back to kind of ace-like status, and they may need to add to that rotation.
Yeah.
And then they're a team that has that gets a little old in places sometimes because they sign bigger deals and they have guys around for a while. I do think it pains me a little bit to say this, but I do think DJ LeMahieu is kind of toasty. And the bat speed is gone. I don't even think he I've seen him play some poor defense recently too. And I don't know that you need to DFA him or something, but they need a starter at third base.
Yeah, I think you need to find a way to make DJ LeMahieu like a semi-regular as opposed to an everyday guy in this lineup. But I think that's down a notch or two from the biggest problem. I would agree they need one more high-quality starting pitcher because I don't know, between Cole's injury this year, Rodon's injury history, even Nestor Cortez missing a lot of time last year, I think you have that elevated risk within that group. You're probably getting Clarke Schmidt back from that lat injury later this year. That could be a big return for them. Clarke Schmidt was pitching really well when he got hurt, so he becomes more important. And as things stand on the roster right now, if Clarke Schmidt were healthy and you had to choose between Schmidt and Marcus Stroman in a playoff game, you'd probably throw Clarke Schmidt instead of Stroman as far as like a game 4 ALCS starter, right? So I think a lot hinges on health for a group of guys that have been generally unhealthy. And then you look at the lineup. There's a few things in the lineup that are strange. We loved Gleyber Torres in his walk here. It has not happened so far. Maybe a big second half is still possible, but he's had an 85 WRC plus so far this season. I think Eno and I looked at Torres and thought, hey, he's going to be 20 or 30% better than league average. There's going to be some power. He's making good swing decisions last year. It's all starting to click for him at just the right time. He's going to be that third best offensive player behind Judge and Soto. I think they do miss Giancarlo Stanton. Stanton, I think gets a lot of negative attention for being a DH and for time he spends on the IL, but he still hits balls to the moon. Like he is their third best power hitter, and it's not even close. So he's kind of important to them, thinking about what their lineup does on a night-to-night basis. Yeah, it comes a lot of swing and miss, but it comes with a lot of damage too. And then there's Anthony Volpe. And I think Volpe's the trickiest player of all to figure out because I thought what Anthony Volpe did as a rookie last year, given all the things we say about the Yankees, given the pressure of being the shortstop there, thinking about how good he was defensively, seeing that he got to 20 home run power, he was stealing bases, he was making good contact. I thought year 2 was going to be a big step forward. And in some ways it's better. He's striking out less, but in a lot of ways it's a little bit worse. He's not making as much hard contact and he's pounding the ball to the ground. And I wonder, what kind of second half is Volpe going to have at the plate? Like he's part of the reason why their defense is good. So he's going to keep playing. He's an important part of their team, but I think you've got to find those secondary bats and get more out of that group of players than you've gotten so far. So I think the blame can be spread out to a lot of different parts of the roster. And I don't know if I'd sit here and say, this is malpractice. Brian Cashman has to go. He built a crappy roster. I think he had a good offseason. He traded for Juan Soto. If you add Juan Soto to your roster, you had a good offseason. So I don't know, you guys. Like this is, to me, unless they can't fix Volpe and they can't get Torres on track, to me, this is a team that needs upgrades at the deadline, but doesn't need an overhaul to be right back in the driver's seat in the AL East here in the coming weeks.
I think that's fair. I think it's a fair assessment. I think if this was another team, we probably wouldn't even be talking about them. or maybe not to this regard of sky is falling, but everything is such a big deal with the Yankees that we're like, well, probably should talk about them because they were good, they were bad. Probably they lie somewhere in the middle. Garrett Cole's going to be better. Some of these guys are going to revert, but also I think the concern is, like Eno said, Stroman, you didn't get Stroman to pitch in games 1, 2, or 3. Well, then who's pitching games 1, 2, and 3 in a playoff series? Who's pitching behind Cole?
I think it's Cole, Nestor, and then Rodon. I think it's those three.
Rodon's got like a 13 ERA over the past month.
Yeah, but that's the hard part, right?
So so that's why I think the pitching is the easiest spot to upgrade if it's there at the deadline.
Yeah, because the home run problem for Rodon, last year he wasn't healthy at all, tried to pitch through it. That's very real. I think it's a function of what Eno was saying. It's the park. The park works against you. It's going to amplify your mistakes. I'm surprised he's not missing more bats. That's the one thing with Carlos Rodon.
Because the stuff seems okay. Seems like it's there.
Yeah, it seems like he could get back to being that 30% K rate guy he was during his final season with the White Sox and that lone season with the Giants. If that happens, that's big because that's the guy you want right behind Garrett Cole if you can get Cole to bounce back. So it's a lot of like rounding up on what's there and getting bounce backs from guys that have underperformed recently or maybe underperformed for the season as a whole. I think it's a tough spot to be in.
One thing that does make it hard when you're Cashman and when you're trying to improve this team is that the baseline's pretty good. And, it doesn't help you, I don't think, to trade for obviously it's going to be obvious when I say his name, like Andrew Haney, because we've tried that before. But like it doesn't help you to just go get, a back end starting pitcher and patch up the back, right? You kind of need to go get something a front line, or else it's not even worth it. Like they wouldn't even play for you necessarily. So, you either get Garrett Crochet, again, maybe a Kikuchi, but like does like a Jack Flaherty move the needle for you? That's another 2-pitch guy that has had, some homer issues. You're taking him from Detroit and putting him in Yankee Stadium. I'd almost rather try the Scherzer, Verlander, Snell grouping. Where, when they're right, they're top end and just kind of take that shot. And again, if we're looking for a third baseman for them, it doesn't help them to get a Patrick Wisdom, even a Eugenio Suarez or a Wilmer Flores. Like those guys won't really help them. So they have a choice of either we just go ahead with Oswaldo Cabrera maybe and give him a shot, or we go for, I guess Rengifo is like a middle ground. Rengifo would be pretty good for them. Or maybe we go big and try to get either Alex Bregman or, hey, Vlad Guerrero Jr. is playing a lot of third. So, you start taking some shots like that maybe. But I don't think it makes a lot of sense to shop down market. And I don't know that the Blue Jays will.
I don't think if they were to trade Vlad Jr., I don't think they're trading him in division. And I can't even imagine the headlines and
Bregman of the Yankees.
that would be different. And then Vlad Jr. playing third base there. Oh,
so we don't really have a great solution for them unless it's like, try to get Rengifo and one of Scherzer and Verlander maybe. I don't even think Verlander is a great choice, and I think the Astros are going to go for it. So you're limited kind of for the kind of like Scherzer, Crochet, Kikuchi, and maybe Rengifo. I mean, that's what you're looking for trade deadline wise. I know that in New York especially, they like to take everybody's best player and put them on the Yankees. And
they love doing that. You need a couple teams in the NL to have miserable Julys to then fall into the seller group, and then maybe you get a couple other pitchers that could become more interesting. Let's fire up the Trademaker 3000 before we go. Which team makes the most sense for Jazz Chisholm Jr.? I saw Craig Mish from the Miami Herald write about Jazz Chisholm being a likely trade piece for the Marlins, suggesting the Royals and Pirates might make a lot of sense because they have needs both at second base and in the outfield, where you'd have a guy you'd have for a few seasons. You have someone that's coming in that's actually having a career best year in terms of cutting down on strikeouts. And Jazz Chisholm Jr. is finally healthy. I mean, part of the reason we haven't seen what his true talent ceiling might be is that he's missed a lot of time over the years, and he's actually been pretty healthy so far this year. So where would you like to see Jazz Chisholm Jr. play if he is in fact moved at the deadline, Britt?
Philly, because I think they could use a little center field addition. And I think when you have a personality like that, you have to look at the personality of the clubhouse. It's a fun, loud, veteran-laden clubhouse. And I think he would fit in there. I think he would, I don't want to say fall in line there, but, I think it wouldn't be his team by quite a long shot. And I think that might be good for him, for where he's at for his career. And I think, that's a team that isn't afraid to make moves. And so I kind of like that. And, I could see him going a bunch of places. The Mariners is another one, but I like the Phillies. I think he would add even more kind of fun to a very fun team.
Yeah, that's a good one. I think that the Reds are surprisingly struggling in center field. They just claimed Austin Slater, and they've had some injuries to TJ Friedel. And it'd be fun to see Jazz Chisholm go from such a pitcher's park to a hitter's park. The Reds, could augment their offense, which has actually been subpar away from home. And they could augment their offense not just for this year. It would fit their sort of profile of, when they traded for, I know Sam Moll's just a reliever, but they wanted to trade for a reliever that they'd have for a while, not trade for a reliever just for one run. So that fits a little bit what they've been doing in the past, is try to build a little bit the dread deadline, but also for next year.
Yeah, I think that's where the Royals made sense, because they need help beyond this season. They could use a boost at both of those spots. I thought that was a great fit logically, and it gives them more from the left side, right? I mean, Witt, Sal, Michael Garcia, all righties, Vinny Pasquantino, a lefty. So you get a second lefty in there. Michael Massey can play some second base too, so you move Jazz between second base and the outfield. Maybe you get better defense from Jazz, putting him back on the dirt as well. So that was the fit for me that really jumped off the page based on needs. Wouldn't be a bad fit in Pittsburgh. Maybe a mystery team swoops in as well. But I like Jazz. I do like Britt's idea of making him part of a team where there are plenty of other stars, because that takes some of the pressure off for the guy that actually won, air quotes, the players poll for this year for most overrated player. Felt like that was a little bit unfair, probably the result of being on the cover of MLB The Show a couple of years ago. A lot of
what about the Red Sox?
Yeah, that could be a fit too.
I was looking at center field, and they didn't.
Buyers, we're not sure what they're doing.
Yeah. Cost wise, it's not a big ad, so I don't think that's prohibitive at all. And I think you can move him around or possibly trade him again this winter, because teams might still be interested if it goes really well for Jazz there. So I'd probably put them in more of the long shot category, but I think it's a possible fit. I've
been looking at the center field depth charts, and if you flip over to second base depth charts, the Royals are 24th. So the Red Sox are 24th. So there's a chance there that there's a match.
Well,
the Dodgers are 20th, but I think that's mostly because Mookie Betts is going to play there probably, and they're not giving him a lot of time because of the injury.
Drop us a line on Discord. Let us know where's the best fit for Jazz Chisholm Jr. at this trade deadline, and get the Marlins a couple of nice players back in return maybe while you're at it. Fill out that side. Join the Discord with the link in the show description. You can find us on Twitter. Britt is at Britt_Giroli. Eno is at Eno Saris. I'm at Derek and Riper. The pod is at Rates and Barrels. That's going to do it for this episode of Rates and Barrels. We're back with you Thursday, 1 o'clock Eastern, live on YouTube.
Thanks for listening.